Okay.
Okay, and since now we just hit the record button, I would like to say for anybody who does end up listening to this that we spoke for a moment on behalf of AIR. This is Marianne Fidelli McLeod. How much we really appreciated working with you all as a group of professionals and people, and we thought it was a tremendous session, and we're just very impressed with the work you're all doing, and so thank you again. And this session today is the planned follow-up to our full day together, and our full day together, of course, focused on the English Language Proficiency Standards for adult education, what they are, how they work, and instructional approaches to implementing the standards. And based on your feedback and our observation of the activities and the questions that came up, we planned this session on instructional scaffolding. I'll get a lot more into what that is, and then Marion will pick it up about halfway and talk about how to do scaffolding through lesson planning and instructional practice. And this will be the intention of focusing on instructional scaffolding is to have something very practical, some practical techniques and approaches that teachers can use to support implementation of the standards in the classroom. Marion, would you add anything to that general introduction of the day? You might be muted. I'll take that as an
Yes, I was muted, sorry. No, Marianne, thank you everyone for being here, and we're ready to go.
Okay. You have controls. All right. I have controls. Marion, let's see. Marion is our tech guru. There we go. I almost needed you. So we're a small group. You'll see that there's a number of slides we're going to hit that have questions. And so I'll ask, and I think Marion will ask that Joanne, Leanne, Meg, as we go, if you could write your questions into the chat pod and hit to everyone. We'd appreciate it, and we'll do our best to answer those questions or to think about them and get back to you. So the first question, we'll just spend just a minute. Joanne, Leanne, Meg, what question, before we get started in scaffolding, what questions do you have about the ELP standards? What questions do you have about planning for implementation before we jump in? So we did our session, and is there any outstanding questions you have, or maybe that you've heard from your colleagues that you'd like us to know before we start?
Marianne, I just want to add, since there's not very many of us, if you do have a mic and you want to use it, that's fine too.
Wonderful, even better. Okay, I will go ahead then, and you could always, we're small groups who jump in at any time with questions. I don't think either of us would mind that. Okay, so let's get into scaffolding and what is meant by scaffolding instruction. Scaffolding, here's a definition from the National Governors Association, and of course scaffolded instruction is a term that is generally used in education to talk about temporary guidance or assistance a teacher can provide to students that help them in performing a task. The goal of scaffolding is for students to eventually be provided with support initially, and then to become independent in completing that task and no longer requiring the scaffold. For adult English language learners, the amount and type of scaffolding really depends on the student's level of English language proficiency and other background variables, such as their literacy level in their native language. And this requires you as teaching professionals, all of us as teaching professionals, to make professional judgments based on our knowledge of those students. So I would say the interplay between the standards and the idea, the concept and practices of instructional scaffolding is that interplay between something that is standardized, and that's the standards themselves. They define the knowledge and skill that we want to get students to, and you could say it's sort of a non-negotiable. The standard is what the standard is. But you as teachers and professional educators are making judgments based on what you know about individual students and how to support them in acquiring those knowledge and skills and ultimately reaching those standards. So I'm going to show just a couple of graphics that depict the concept of scaffolding in two ways. So this first is, as you can see, I'm not going to read all of the components in the graphic, but the general idea is the scaffold is providing support for doing a task as long as it's needed, but not longer. So in this view, which is the gradual release of responsibility concept for this, we're going from dependence to independence, and the way we get there is through the gradual release. And the gradual release has these four components: demonstration. A teacher models the demonstration of knowledge and skills. So the teacher explains, demonstrates, thinks aloud. Shared practice is the next phase of this four-phase process, where the teacher is explicitly teaching and the student practices together at the same time. Then we have guided practice, where students practice the strategy with coaching from the teacher. So the teacher's, less in the front of the room, more along the side, and we're getting growing independent work from students. Finally, independent practice. The student applies practice on their own and receives feedback. And then the goal is they're able to, finally in the bottom right corner, that student transfers learning to a new situation. So they have fully integrated that knowledge and skill set in a way that allows them to use it not only on their own, but to apply it to new situations, new learning situations. I include the link to the website where you could find this graphic, where it also includes a lot more discussion and some resources associated with gradual release of responsibility as a model. I keep losing my clicker here. Okay, here's the second graphic. Just you know your own preferred visual learning styles. This is just another way of saying about the same thing. I think this graphic is nice. It just shows the process a little differently and maybe more simply. So, but with the ultimate idea of we're moving towards independence. And so, first we model the task for students. The I do it. Then we do it again with students participating. We do it together. Again, this is sort of the teacher as the primary driver of these first two pieces. Next, we have students work together in groups to do the same task, maybe with some support, maybe with different content. So that's the you do it together piece. And then finally, students are able to do it alone. You do it. You do it alone. In some cases, or for some students, any or all of the stages may need to be repeated several times before the student really achieves competence and real confidence with the new knowledge and skills learned. I am going to pause. We're a small group, so like I said, I'm Marion. I'm looking at my slides and notes mostly. So if you see something come up in the chat pod, just alert me. And if you all want to interrupt, please feel free to do so.
Okay.
So, excuse me, we're going to continue a little bit more with what is scaffolding and some resources that are provided in the ELP standards book, which you received a copy of at the training we did. So this is from a table in one of the appendices of the book, table C1. The standards, the ELP standards for adult ed, we deliberately avoided making specific recommendations for scaffolds inside of the standards. You'll recall that there were the 10 anchor standards, and under each standard, 5 level descriptors. And we deliberately did not include along in those descriptors the scaffolds, because we did not want to appear overly prescriptive and limiting in the short amount of space we had in the development of the product. overly prescriptive of the type of scaffolds associated with each standard and each level descriptor in the standard. We wanted this to really be open to professional wisdom, teacher practice, teacher knowledge. So it was put in an appendix instead. And in that appendix C1, which you'll find in the report, we provide recommendations for supports and scaffolds that help ELLs of different proficiency levels engage in instructional tasks. I'm going to get into these a little bit more. So the way we thought this would be useful, and I think there's other ways of putting it together that would be just as useful. We recommended supports and scaffolds and provided for adult ELLs at different ELP levels. So across the top in red, you'll see in the column the ELP levels 1 through 2. And in the column below that, all of the different types of scaffolds that may be appropriate for adult ELLs in English language proficiency levels 1 and 2, then ELP levels 3 and 4, and then ELP level 5. Some supports and scaffolds, such as, you'll see some of these are appropriate for more than one level, and this list is not meant to be exhaustive. We tried to make it comprehensive, but it's definitely not exhaustive. So the supports and scaffolds are divided into categories. So the levels are across the top, and then along the left side, you'll see the 3 categories or types of scaffolds: teacher language and teacher-student exchanges, materials and activities, and student groupings. So the teacher language and teacher-student exchanges category is all about the ways teachers provide support and scaffolds during instruction and when interacting with students, such as giving wait time, using native language as appropriate. I'll give you, I'm going to go to the next slide and give you just a moment to look at these in larger font. And I have a couple questions for you that, and feel free to type or to just speak using your phone. Which of these do you do often? What are other ways of scaffolding through language you use in exchanges you have with students? I'll give you just a minute to read on your own and then either type in or share. Okay, Joanne and Leanne, I believe you're in the classroom, and Meg, I know you are a longtime educator. So of these teacher language and teacher-student exchanges, are there some that you use or use often? Joanne writes wait time and graphic organizers. Thanks, Joanne. I think that is tried and true, and many of your colleagues, both in the state and around the country, would probably agree. And Leanne writes paraphrase, model, and TPR. And if I could put you on the spot, Leanne, because we're going to have folks who do read this afterwards. If you wouldn't mind, would you just write a word about TPR, what it is and how you use it? Or just what it is. I'll give you a moment to write if you wouldn't mind.
Hey, Marianne, this is Meg. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Oh, great. I just thought I'd jump in while Leanne's thinking about that. I really appreciate the large font. I was having a hard time with the previous screen. I was searching for another pair of glasses. I'm just curious because I wasn't in attendance at the training, unfortunately. This seems like these are really great tables here, and I'm just wondering whether this document is something that the teachers already received in their handouts from the training. Oh, okay, great.
Yes. So this, what we're seeing, these categories are in the standards book. Debbie has maybe an extra copy or two, and it's downloadable. I can resend the link, Meg. So yeah, this would all be in there, along with more detail about what's meant by scaffolds, and but not really any. I will say, not specific examples of these things in use or other tools.
Okay,
but I think Marion is going to get into some of that. Leanne, thanks. TPR is total physical response, and it utilizes physical signals or body gestures, so physical communication. Thanks, Leanne. I know I did put you on the spot, and I appreciate you being open to sharing. Okay, I will go on. The material, and I promise the font is going to get bigger.
Okay, thanks.
In just a moment, materials and activities category, it provides some examples and suggests ways that instructors can provide assistance through the materials you use in class and the ways we engage in activities. For example, some examples include sentence starters, sentence frame, bilingual glossaries. And I know that's small. Let me go to my next. That's a little bigger. So I hope you can see it. There's a lot in this category, again, divided up by level. So again, if I know it's just you, Meg, Leanne, and Joanne on the spot. So if you wouldn't mind, though, just look at these, and are there a few that you use? And maybe based on your knowledge of your colleagues, are there ones that you think you or others would want to learn more about?
Marianne, this is Meg again. I'm just noticing, I like I was a big fan of sentence starters, so that caught my eye on the list there. And one of the things I used to do was constantly create sentence starters, write them out on index cards, put them in like a cookie tin or some kind of a box, shake it up, and literally just as a warm-up activity, pass the box around the room, and everybody just draws draws a card, and they just need to complete the sentence, whatever you might be working on. They're all customizable, but it was just a quick warm-up activity that everybody got used to and knew how to deal with it. Pull the card out of the box, read the sentence, and complete it, and carry on around the room.
Yep, I think that is tried and true also, Meg, and very effective. Let's see, and Leanne writes, graphic organizers from Venn diagrams, T-columns. Just go backwards. Joanne uses visuals, which you'll see across the 3 level columns. And Leanne writes, I use a lot of graphics and photos. And are there some that, as you read through, that you think you and your colleagues might be interested in receiving more information about, some examples of, or having other professional development in? I'll give you a moment to consider that.
This is Meg again. I don't see it on this list, but on a previous slide, there was mention of doing think alouds. And I found that for a lot of teachers, it's very helpful to have some models of that. you know, even just like a video demonstration in several different contexts. And I'm just curious whether you ladies know of any good video-based resources for teachers that demonstrate, you know, showing in real time with real students a teacher doing a think aloud, a structured think aloud.
I will say nothing comes to my mind right away, but maybe after this session, I could just sort of, you know, see what's at my fingertips. Because I know some recent videos produced on this. Go ahead, Marian.
The one that I've seen a lot is a reading activity with House on Mango Street, which has, the text is very simple, but there's a lot of inference to be made from the text. And so if you just Google Think Aloud House on Mango Street, there's videos of it, there's graphics of it, there's a PDF, and it's a little bit high level, so it's not a good example for beginning or high beginning, but it gives teachers an idea of what a think aloud looks like, that you're just talking aloud, making your thinking process as you're reading loud, so people can you can sharing it with other people. So that's one example.
I'll look for that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And Joanne writes, I'd like to learn about analyzing language, concrete, and abstract concepts. Thanks, Joanne. And you know, Meg, I'm glad you're on the phone, and you know, after this session, we'll write up some of our, again, me and Marian, based on the full day session, came up with this idea, and maybe we could be happy to put our heads back together after this, sort of in combination, this webinar and the face-to-face, some ideas for you all to consider for furthering professional learning around ESL instruction. We'll be happy to do that. Let me keep going. And the final category is student groupings, which suggest ways teachers can structure student pair or small groups to provide adult ELLs with maximum access to level-specific tasks and activities. And again, those early models about getting to the you do it or you all do it together, these type of groupings are essential to sort of achieving those phases in the gradual release process and really moving towards independence. So student groupings include partner work, which may include additional scaffolds. So some of the scaffolds from the teacher exchange and materials and activities category to support students working in those groups together. And, you know, you'll see some repetition here. Which of these, and here's what I'll imagine, that as educators, you probably all use these approaches in our classroom, partner work and small group work. So I'll say, let's skip over the first question. And are there some other or different ways to group students that you have seen or tried or found particularly effective besides the partner work or small group work? Or perhaps when using partners or small group works, are there some things that you find really effective in supporting students while they're grouped? I'll give you a moment to consider that and to feel free to speak or write your response. And I will say for my piece, I was while I was teaching, I primarily taught levels 1 and 2, beginning literacy level and low-level ESL. And for partner small group work to be successful, the materials and activities from the scaffolds from the material and activities category were really essential to that success. So, for example, providing sentence starters for groups to consider and complete together. We're using graphic organizers for small groups or partners to work with. So I think especially in my experience, especially for the lower level students, you do need to use scaffolds from the other categories for them to be successful. Let's see. Okay, I don't see other comments, so I will go on. Okay, and with that, I'm going to hand off now to Marion.
Okay, so I just have to say that this page of this standards, Appendix C1, is my favorite page in the whole document because the standards are important and we need to be aware of the standards and the guiding principles. But this appendix is so practical because it's giving you all these, it's just listing strategies of how to do some of these things. So what I was thinking was, and you know, scaffolding, you're doing a lot of them already. I can tell from what you're posting. Of course you are. And I was doing some of these things in my classroom also before I ever heard the word scaffolding or knew that it was called that. So it's not like a radical new concept, but the importance of it is just to remember that we always want our students to be doing something that's a little bit above their ability, so it's just a little bit challenging and is moving them forward. If it's super easy, there's a place for that, to just practice what you know so it becomes automatic, but we don't want to do too much of that. And if it's too hard, then it's too frustrating and people feel like, I'll never learn English, or I'll never be a good reader or whatever. So we're always targeting that level that's just a little bit above where they are, and that's what scaffolding helps us do, so that you can give students a reading that is just a little bit challenging, has a little bit of vocabulary that they may have never heard of before. And Joanne, I appreciate your comment, I think it was Joanne, about teaching concrete and abstract concepts, because teaching those concrete concepts like pineapple are pretty easy because you can show a picture of a pineapple or bring in a pineapple, but teaching responsibility and ethical behavior and stuff like that, you know, it's like, how do you draw a picture of that? So I thought what we would do here is look at an actual lesson and look at the parts of the lesson and then look at how to scaffold some of the different parts of the lesson. So the lesson is a news article about a new light rail line that's opening in a city. It happens to be in Minnesota, but it happens to be Minneapolis, but it could be anywhere. And this will be, I think, kind of familiar to you, not the actual article, but just, you know, teaching a lesson on a reading. So, Leanne, this reading is probably high for your students, so you have to imagine that, imagine doing this with a reading that's something that you would use with your class. And Joanne, I'm not sure about the level of your ABE students, so this might be something you could use, or it might be a little bit high for you too, or it might be a little bit low, I'm not sure. But anyway, this lesson came from the Atlas Lesson Bank, which is from the good people in Minneapolis, and they have an awesome lesson collection and all kinds of professional development resources there. So I think we'll make these slides available to you guys after this and post them with a recording maybe, so that you can have these links as well. So I was going to just tell you this story and then talk about the lesson, but I think it's not too long and there's not too many of us, so we're not going to be spending so much time reading the chat. So I think I'll just go ahead and read it to you. So sit back, relax, and just imagine your students are either reading this or watching. It was a video. I think the video is not online anymore because it's from a news channel, a local news channel, so they don't have the video anymore, but the transcript is still there. So here's the story. For some business owners along University Avenue, the opening of the Metro Green Line this weekend brings a sigh of relief. While some celebrate, however, others are packing up. Years of construction meant fewer customers and even less money. Although much has developed around the rail line, some store owners are preparing to sell. For 27 years, the Best Steakhouse, and that's the name of the restaurant, Best Steakhouse, at University in Victoria, has been a familiar stop for many, and everyone knows its owner, Mike Hatzistamoulis. But when construction on the Green Line began, business slowed. I was down about 20%, Hatzistamoulis said. Hatzistamoulis says that The first sight of test trains brought many of his old customers back, and even some new ones have stumbled in. Some as construction was over, it popped right back up, plus 20% on top of it. Metro Transit says 121 new businesses and housing units have popped up within a half-mile of the Green Line. Approximately $2.5 billion worth of new construction and redevelopment projects since engineering began some 5 years ago. Since that time, Gilbert Marty, who owned his secondhand store along University, now he says the light rail sends passengers right by his secondhand store. Drivers too. There are no cars stopping, he says. That's the thing. They used to stop and shop. They can't do it now. Where are they going to park? Before construction, he made a living. Now, empty stores has forced him to put the building up for sale. I used to have 5 or 10 people in here all day long shopping, Marty said. I think I had one customer early this morning. I think he spent $2. I can barely eat on that. According to Metro Transit, during the period of heavy construction along the Green Line, 128 businesses opened and 90 closed. 27 moved off the corridor and 25 moved within the corridor. So that's the article that they would be reading. These are the pieces of the lesson. Preview the lesson, and then they would listen and read for specific information, and you'll see what that is. And then they would listen or read again to make inferences. And then there's lots of critical thinking possibilities to discuss based on this article. And finally, there would be some kind of assessment of how well they mastered this particular lesson. So in this case, the teacher uses a rubric, and as she walks around, just assesses each student's participation in the lesson. So here's the vocabulary. Pack up. Mr. Marty is going to pack up and move because his business is down. So business slowed might be an idiomatic expression. Stumble in is another one. Some new customers stumbled in to the best steakhouse. New businesses popped up. What does that mean? Secondhand store. Corridor. So there's the line, and then there's a corridor that's about a half a mile on each side. So I guess that's a concrete concept. You could show a map or draw a picture of it. Breathe new life in, definitely not concrete, and redevelopment project. Students would have to understand that. So that's the vocabulary. So let's think about when you teach vocabulary, how do you scaffold that? So let's say you are teaching these or some other set of vocabulary. What do you do to help your students prepare to read or listen to a lesson that's going to have unfamiliar vocabulary? Just one example. And then I'll give you my examples for what they're worth.
Marian, this is Meg. I'm not sure if I understand the question exactly, but are you saying is this what you're looking for? The first thing I might consider doing is starting by asking, do you know what they think something means? You know, just on there's a part of the word that's familiar, or they've heard it in another context, or whatever.
Yes.
You know? So you would. I mean, my instinct would be to begin with. What do you think it means?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a really good point, and that's exactly what I mean. Like, what do you do when you start teaching vocabulary? And that was a good one, Meg, because at the very end of this, we're going to look at a list of qualities that we want our lessons to have, and that's one of them, is basing it on information or knowledge that students already have, because you want to start where they are, not where you think they are, or where you think they should be, or where you assume they are. So good example. Joanne and Leanne, I'm sure you have lots of ways of introducing vocabulary. Just keep thinking and write whenever you want. I'm going to go on, but post your examples whenever you are ready. So so I'm going to go through the parts of the lesson first. So after they look at that vocabulary, they either watch the video or they read the article. Then they might be listening for specific information. So these are some of the questions you might ask. So these are text-dependent questions. You can't answer these questions without looking at the text. But they aren't really making inferences. The information is all there. Then you might have them listen again and make some inferences. So it doesn't exactly tell you how Mr. Hatzisamalis, they couldn't pick an easier name to have in the story, right? Mr. Hatzisamalis feels about the light rail and how Mr. Marty feels, but you get the idea from their comments and what they say. And then there's sort of the bigger questions about development of a city or a neighborhood or adding a light rail. It's good for some people. It's not good for other people overall. What do you think about that? What are the benefits and the drawbacks? So these are more higher level critical thinking kinds of questions. And then this is the rubric for this lesson that the teacher used. So she's really looking especially at how students are participating. So do they participate in the group work? Do they guess at the vocabulary, just like Meg was describing? Do they are they able to find specific information in the article, and are they able to defend an opinion about the article or something that they infer from the article? Okay, so those are the pieces of the lesson. So starting with the vocabulary, how can we scaffold this? Leanne, I'm just reading this lesson outline can be used ELA 2 to 3 learners. Okay, so is that higher than yours? Is high beginning 2? Anyway, thank you for that. Thank you for that analysis. So let's look at some ways to scaffold vocabulary. And a lot of these are going to be familiar to you. So let's say you have pretty beginning students. You might just start with this. Look for these words and circle them in the article. So you're just recognizing the words and the spelling of the words before you even start talking about the meaning. You might have them just point to the words if you're projecting the article on the board. You might use a close, and I know when we were there, people gave a lot of examples of close activities. So he will something something and move, probably pack up. Or you can use, instead of the dash for the word, dashes for each letter so you know how many letters are in it, which will help. Particularly, you have so many students who don't come from a Roman alphabet, so that might be really helpful for some of them. And if they need more scaffolding than that, you could give the first letter or give just the vowels or just the consonants or something, whatever you think is going to be most effective with your students, but you get the idea. So for the higher level students, maybe you give a definition, you ask that you use the words in a sentence, and then you ask them to use the word in a sentence. You might ask them to give an example for each term. You might ask them, if that's easy, like your students are higher than that, have 3 examples for each item. You might provide sentence starters, as Meg mentioned before. And here's an example. Mr. Marty's business is not good. He will pack up and move. Okay, so that's the scaffolding for the vocabulary. Then listening for specific information. How can we scaffold this? Like if these questions are at the right level for your students, you're in good shape. But if they're a little bit challenging, how are you going to scaffold so that they can be successful with this activity? Do you want to, do you have a thought about that? I'm sorry, I know I'm torturing the 3 of you. Oh, Michelle, you're here too. Good. I'm torturing the 4 of you now. Leanne, thank you. True or false? That's a good idea. So you'd have to have a sort of a yes-no question, and then they could say true or false. Gilbert Marty owns a steakhouse. True or false? False. Gilbert Marty owns a secondhand store. Good idea. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you some examples, some other examples. You might repeat, paraphrase, and model the question before they listen to the video. Joanne, you'd have them read the questions first before reading the article. Yes, that's a good idea. I like that too. So that's an option. You can do that. So then they're reading for specific information, or you can, if they're at a little bit higher level, have them read and then find the specific information. Both of those are good strategies. Both of you had said use a graphic organizer. I think both of you or all of you said that. And that's a fabulous idea. And actually, was it Leanne? Yeah, said a T-chart, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. Provide sentence starters. We talked about that one already. Work with a partner. So that's a grouping strategy, right? If you think, oh, I have some people in here that can do this and some people that are going to struggle, maybe I can partner them in different abilities together so that one can help the other. And here's an example of a T-chart. So you ask the same questions and you answer it for each one of the people that were interviewed in the article. How long on University Avenue? Mr. has its stimulus 27 years, and Mr. Marty, I don't remember, but it was shorter than 27 years. Okay, so I see that you're doing that already. Okay, now we're getting to a little bit higher level of thinking, a little bit more critical thinking and problem solving. So listen again and make inferences. How does Mr. Hatzisimulis feel? Thank you. I really thought maybe I should change this guy's name before the webinar, but I didn't do it. And then how does Mr. Marty feel, and how can two people feel so differently? So these are more, they might write, in this case, the teacher was asking them to write their answers. These are also good discussion questions. So they might write and then discuss. But how could we scaffold this? One thing is, like, let's say we're having them discuss, we might want to scaffold by teaching some of the, and this is, if you remember back to the training talking about academic language and how important academic language is, because in some contexts, like in a college class or in a discussion with your supervisor, maybe you need to use this kind of more formal language. So how do you state your opinion in a way that's appropriate? In my opinion, Mr. Hatzisimulis really likes the light rail because his business is up 20%. I didn't do that, Marianne.
Yeah,
You didn't do that either?
Do it. Hang on, let me.
Okay, you don't, let me just do it.
Okay, sorry
Yeah.
about that, guys.
That's okay.
I made the mistake of moving.
Do not move.
Don't move. Okay, I won't move again.
Okay. Or finding evidence from a text. This is a big one in college and career readiness standards, which is what we're moving our students towards. So being able to talk about what evidence you find in a text, you can point that out by saying, you can see that Mr. Marty is upset because he's not making enough money. And here we have the think aloud, which we just talked about a little while ago. Okay, so then here are more critical thinking questions, and these kind of raise the bar a little bit more. And I'm not sure how you guys feel about doing this level of discussion with your class. It's more challenging at the lower levels, but it's really an important skill to be developing at every level. So we want to get to that point where they're comparing something with something else, analyzing the results of something. And this might be an experience that people have experienced. I know that in my case, I just happened to be in my neighborhood. They've been discussing building a light rail down the main street of my neighborhood. And all these same questions that are raised by this article are raised in neighborhood discussions, because it's going to be good for some people and not so good for other people. So it's definitely a good critical thinking activity, or topic, I should say. And you can see we're probably you've seen Bloom's taxonomy before, and this is the revised version of Bloom's taxonomy. So the beginning levels are like just remember what you read, understand what you read, but then you're getting up to apply, like take this information and now let's look at a different situation. How does this information apply there? Or analyze, like examine what were the issues, why did the city decide to build a light rail there? Is it okay for some businesses to suffer? Overall, was the outcome positive or negative? So that's getting into analyzing and evaluating. And then creating would be write a proposal for building a new bus line or a new light rail or a bike lane or a crosswalk in your neighborhood. Adding a stop sign, anything like that would be creating based on what you learned. So now that we're having people discuss in small groups, we're looking at grouping strategies. And the scaffolding list just gives you some types of groups. It's basically pairs or small groups. But how do you assign those groups? Do you do it randomly? Do you get the people that have basically the same ability together? Like when you were in first grade and you were in a reading group, were you in the Bluebirds or the Robins? So those were like ability groups where the higher readers were grouped together and the not so high readers were grouped together. Or do you have mixed ability groups? Do you have partners, or do you have threes, or do you have fours? And if you have 3 or 4, what roles do you assign to each person so everybody knows that they have a responsibility within the group? And then line up. Tell me if you do this. Just type in the chat. Do you do a lineup where you have students just line up in 2 lines facing each other, and then they might have a dialogue or a conversation with the person across from them, and then one line moves up one person? Leanne, yes, you're doing that. Thanks. Okay, and what about 4 corners? Is that a familiar one to you? Not really. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep talking. I don't want to be telling you things you already know for an hour. So 4 corners would be like you put up a sign or a piece of paper in each corner that's like, I want to see a new light rail in one corner. I don't want to see a new light rail in another corner. I agree with Mr. Hatzisopoulos in one corner. I agree with Mr. Marty in another corner. Or maybe those aren't good examples because it has to be 4 things that are kind of related to each other. So let me think of it. And you guys think too. Oh, Leanne, you use a deck of cards. How? I don't know how to do that. Oh, so you use a deck of cards and then you have all the hearts sit together, or all the 4s sit together, or all the queens sit together. I get it. Same suit. Thank you. Okay. Slow but sure. Thank you. That's a good idea. I never did that. So 4 corners. I think we would have done this with you guys in the training if there hadn't been so many of you, but to have 50 or 60 people walking around to different corners becomes a little unmanageable. But let's say we would have in one corner, I already know everything about the ELP standards and I could teach this. In another corner, I'm familiar with the standards, but I haven't used them that much. In another corner, I'm not too familiar. In another corner, I've never heard of them before and I don't know why I'm here. So then you group everybody according to kind of where they are on the topic that you're talking about that day, and have a question that they discuss with each other. So it's a mixer also, so that each group in each corner talks to their fellow students that chose the same thing that they chose. And then maybe you could have them, then you have them just come back, or you could have them mix with one other group and share what their reasons were or something like that. So just different grouping strategies. Same suit or same numbers. Thanks, Leanne. Great. So, but you can see these are pretty challenging questions, but you want to look for these in every lesson that you teach. If you can find a way to raise the level to a level of critical thinking. I don't know if any of you have an example from a lesson that you've taught recently that you could give of how you integrated critical thinking into the lesson.
Yeah. And I don't want.
Okay. I guess you're not saying yeah to me.
She should let.
So that would be a lot of typing.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, and more so, he's not even an employee. He's questioning employees and being rude about it in a threatening way.
Makes sense how he got his pass. So.
Yeah. But I guess we don't give up.
I'm just going to mute that one. Okay, so more scaffolding strategies for small group discussions. One is wait time and teaching wait time. And you can see us working on this. Me and Marianne are both working on this in this webinar, because like, how long do you wait for people? Are they thinking and they want to type, or are they not thinking and they're just waiting for you to go on? But as teachers in general, wait time is a challenge because we want to fill up the space and we want people to feel like something's happening in every minute. But sometimes a lot is happening, but it's not happening out loud. It's happening in the students thinking about the issue, and we have to wait and give time, because otherwise the fast processors get to talk all the time and the slower processors don't get to participate as much because they need a little bit more time to process. So it's important to structure it so that those people get the time that they need. And a quick write, did we do a quick write with you? I'm trying to remember. I don't think we did. But just to say, okay, I want you to read this article and then write what you think about it. Just take 5 minutes and write in English your thoughts about the article. So not really structured, just a way of just starting the flow going, getting pen to paper and getting something out. Modeling, we've also talked about in gradual release. Marianne did a good job of explaining gradual release. I do, we do, you do together, and then you do alone. And then we looked at this before. Here's the assessment rubric. So can you imagine, let me just ask you if you think this is realistic. Let's say you had a rubric like this. So this is for individual, you could assess groups, or you could put a group of students, maybe assess them together. But basically this is really assessing each individual student. So depending on how big your class is, this can be hard to do. But if they're doing a lot of group work and you're walking around and observing each person, you do have a chance to do this with each person. So just type in the chat, realistic or not realistic. I could do this in my class, or I think this would be hard to pull off in my class. It would be challenging. Leanne, you could do it. Joanne, it would be challenging. Not too realistic because of the paper. I know, I was thinking about that. I was thinking actually you could probably do this in a way where you had it on a spreadsheet and then you had each student's I don't know if you can see my cursor, but in the left-hand column, instead of having the items, you would have the students' names. And then across the top, you would have the items, and then you would just write in here 1, 0, 1, 2, or 3. So I think you could make this a little easier on yourself if you had a lot of students. Yeah, because it could be challenging. Okay, this is, wow, we're doing very good on time. Thank you so much for helping us with this. I'm just going to show you a checklist. This is from Doreen Ewart, who did a presentation a couple of years ago, at the California ESL conference. Basically, this is a list of what makes a classroom task effective, classroom task effectiveness checklist. So you'll have this when you get the slides. So let's look at this and see if our lesson that we just walked through was effective. First of all, was it student-centered? Did it begin by accessing student-specific prior content knowledge? And Meg saved our bacon on that one because she started right out with assessing what the students already know. What do you think this means? Or what do you think you understand from this article? And that's right. And I probably did not have that in my lesson. So I might have not gotten a check on this one. I might have gotten a no. The second one, and on the left you see the guiding principles. These are the LP guiding principles. So which ones are we modeling when we make sure our activities have these things? Collaborative. Have students worked collaboratively to build knowledge together? Well, what do you think about that one? Yes or no? Did we have collaborative work? Yes. Thank you. Yeah, they worked in groups, and they might have worked in pairs on the vocabulary, so we did have some collaborative work. Whole language. We did reading, if they read the article. We did speaking because they talked with each other. We did listening because they talked with each other, and you can't really have a conversation without listening. And they did writing, if they did a writing activity with the vocabulary, and if they answered some of those questions in writing. So that would kind of depend. Meg, you think so too, thanks. Cyclical. So necessitates multiple passes through the lesson, through the reading in this case, for looking for different things. So they read it first, maybe looking for the vocabulary. Then they read it answering specific questions, text-dependent questions. Then they read it to make inferences, and then they applied some of the concepts in some critical thinking questions. So yes, it was definitely cyclical. Was it critical thinking based? Did they have to synthesize information in various ways? Yes, they could have. Maybe we could have done more with that, I think. Leanne, I'm looking at learner independence oriented. So, oh, I skipped one. Thank you. Learner independence oriented. Model strategies for self-directed reading and learning. Well, on the one hand, I'll give you my opinion, and feel free to type your opinion in the chat. We did model strategies for self-directed reading and learning. So if you preview the vocabulary and something before you start reading, that could help you. If you ask yourself questions as you're reading, that can help you become a better reader. The thing that we didn't do, though, is we didn't do the metacognitive thing of saying, and now we're going to do this vocabulary exercise, and this will help you if you do this when you read a new piece of information. So we didn't specifically spell out why are we doing this, and I think that's a really good thing to do that I didn't think to do in this lesson. And the last one, performance-based. Did they demonstrate learning in multiple modes? Well, they did quite a bit. They didn't end up with a project, but they did have a vocabulary checklist. They did have a rubric. They did have some other things. So overall, I'm giving this lesson an A-. Meg, this underscores the importance of teacher think alouds. Yes, it does, because the thing that the think aloud does is it makes explicit what is implicit to us that we don't always make conscious to ourselves, and it's really important because it's like riding a bike. Once you know how to do it, you take it for granted, and you don't say, first push down on the right pedal, then push down on the left pedal, hold on. You don't think about all the different pieces of it. But when you're just learning it, each one of those things is important. So it's really good to make those things explicit and conscious, and that's what a think aloud does. Okay, so that is our webinar on scaffolding. Thank you so much, you intrepid web travelers that met with us today. We really appreciate you, and we hope others will be able to access this through the recording. and we will be sending the recording shortly. Marianne, anything else?
Likewise, thank you so much. We appreciated those of you on with us, participating and making a good webinar for your colleagues who will hopefully be seeing this when we send out the recording. So thank you again. And Meg, for you and Debbie at Hawaii Department of Ed, we really enjoyed working with you, and look forward to any future collaboration we may have. And anybody who's on the webinar now or who listens, please feel free to get in touch with me and Marion at the email addresses and phone numbers we shared.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.